On Thursday evening, during President Biden's State of the Union address, we didn't necessarily have any of those moments like we've had in the past with Republicans jumping up and shouting angrily and making complete and total asses of themselves. But Marjorie Taylor Greene did still manage to make a fool of herself by violating House rules. And she did it by wearing a MAGA hat to the speech. As if there's anybody in this country that wasn't aware that Marjorie Taylor Greene was a full-on MAGA fanatic. She had to wear the cap, to kind of stick it to President Biden in case... what? In case you thought maybe that he thought you were on his side, and he's like, oh no, a MAGA hat, what am I gonna do? To his credit, by the way, when he walked into the room, he just totally walked right past her, didn't even acknowledge it. So good on Biden. But again, we're looking at a situation, third, fourth year in a row at this point, where Marjorie Taylor Greene makes an ass of herself during the State of the Union. Like, this is almost becoming a tradition at this point. It's a horrible tradition that I wish we could end, but she is going to keep it alive. But here's the thing about that MAGA hat. That is expressly forbidden on the floor of the House because it is a campaign apparel. You cannot wear any kind of campaign memorabilia. You can't have any campaign, current campaign crap on you. None of it is allowed on the House floor. The House floor is for official business only. So she did violate the rules there. In fact, Rachel Maddow asked former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill about this. She said, MTG in direct violation... Oh, I'm sorry. This was Jamie Raskin. He said, MTG in direct violation of the rules of the House by wearing campaign insignia on the House floor. And then Rachel Maddow, after seeing this post by Jamie Raskin on Twitter, she asked Claire McCaskill, quote, I just have to ask you about that hat. Isn't there a rule? And McCaskill said, I'm really surprised that she's not being asked to remove that hat. It makes me think that Speaker Johnson is really afraid of her. Especially a hat that is, I'm not aware of any time a hat is allowed on the floor, at least of the Senate, McCaskill says. I'm not familiar with the House rules, but you could never wear a hat on the floor of the Senate. So I'm not sure, other than if the Speaker just doesn't want to have the Sergeant-at-Arms tell her to remove it, because if they did, they would probably remove him from Speaker. She'd file a motion. So Speaker Johnson, who of course got to sit behind President Biden during this speech, he could have gone up to her and said, hey, you got to take the hat off. We got to be reverent around here. It's campaign insignia. Plus, you're not even allowed to wear hats on the floor anyway. Just take off the hat. But he didn't do it because he's afraid of her. Now, it would have been hilarious if he actually did send the Sergeant-at-Arms over there like, hey, remove the hat or I'm going to remove you. That would have been quite a scene. Because Marjorie Taylor Greene would not have peacefully said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. No, there would have been an altercation, the likes of which we haven't seen since the caning of Charles Sumner. But it's all performative. And that's the point here. This is what Marjorie Taylor Greene does. She doesn't go into Congress every day and think about, okay, what kind of legislation do I need to write? What are the concerns of the voters in my district? What are the concerns of the rest of the voters in the country? No, she thinks, how can I be crazy today? Like, can you imagine that as a person? You wake up every day. You're in a position where you could do good in the world. But instead of using that position to do good, you wake up and you say, how can I get my name in the headlines today? What kind of ridiculous, stupid, idiotic thing can I do that's going to get people to talk about me? By contrast, look at a guy like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is in the headlines all the time. Why? Because Bernie Sanders calls out the powers that be. Bernie Sanders puts forward legislation to actually help the American people. He's getting headlines, and he doesn't have to be crazy to do it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, on the other hand, decided, well, I could do good, but instead I'd rather do crazy. And this is what we're left with. So it doesn't matter that she'll probably end up being fined for wearing the hat. She'll pay the fine. She'll piss and moan about it, get her name in the headlines more for being mad about it. But at the end of the day, she did exactly what she wanted to do. She was likely fully aware of the consequences, but did it anyway, because she knows we're all going to talk about how crazy she is. And she doesn't care if it's good attention or bad attention. She just wants that attention.